she no longer had to be terrified of how her final few days might play out. We knew firsthand, because of family friends of ours, a friend of mine whose parent died of a stage 3 brain tumor, and a friend of hers whose parent died of a GBM. And so we knew that what was coming for Brittany, in addition to what she was already suffering from, pain that not even morphine could alleviate, the inability to sleep for days on end, nausea, the vomiting, the seizures. What was coming next was, as the tumor grows and puts pressure on different parts of the brain, that she would lose her eyesight and go blind. The likelihood that she would become at least partially paralyzed was pretty high. That she'd become completely paralyzed was a possibility. And that's where Brittany said, well, I will not die that way. Why should I be forced to? As I mentioned, Brittany, we had to find a house to rent in Portland, Oregon, establish residency, find a new medical team, pack up half of our house into a U-Haul truck, say goodbye to our friends and family, and drive 600 miles north from California, where we lived, just so that Brittany would have this option of a gentle passing. Nobody should have to go through that after being told that you have 6 months to live. That was the reason that Brittany spoke up. For her, it was just a great injustice that we had to leave our home to another state in order to have this option of a gentle passing, because the state we lived in did not offer her the assurance that her dying process would be peaceful, would be gentle. As was mentioned, the parameters of this legislation: 2 physicians independent of one another agree this person is terminally ill, mentally competent. There's they make the request both verbally and in writing, the 15-day waiting period, witnesses involved. Brittany felt extremely protected going through this process. And I would say that for the first time, because of this legislation, we can be reassured that, as it pertains to, again, what the opposition likes to bring up of slippery slope, is a term they use a lot, coercion, undue family influence, with this legislation, for the first time, the patient is actually being heard, because it's entirely up to that patient. That patient has to sit across from that physician and make the request that they want information regarding medical aid in dying. It cannot be done by proxy. It cannot be done by power of attorney. Only that individual can make that request. Currently, and let's not kid ourselves, this does happen behind closed doors. And it typically happens with the administration of morphine, a lot of times once a person is in hospice. That is where I would say the risk of abuse and coercion to the most vulnerable in our society, that, and again, I'm borrowing from what the opposition likes to spin, the elderly, the disabled. In the absence of this legislation, that's where those abuses could take place. With this legislation, as I mentioned, Brittany's voice is being heard. They say that sunlight is the best disinfectant. And because this program brings to the light of day where we can have these conversations about end of life and that patient's goals, and as part of the parameters of this, all of the treatment options, there's a whole slew of items that the physicians need to cover with the patient before they're approved. And those include, are you aware of chemotherapy, radiation, all these different treatments that are out there, the clinical trials, etc. One thing I'll say, my wife, Brittany, we received this medication in May. She died in November. I mention that because the terms that, as was brought up, terminology does really play a big factor into the public perception of this policy. In California, the law was called the End of Life Option Act. Here it's referred to as the Death with Dignity Act. Those are accurate. The actual practice is called medical aid in dying. That too is accurate. Brittany applied for this medication, and when she received it, she put it in the cupboard and she focused on living life. She focused on researching everything she could to extend her life. The opposition likes to use terms like suicide. The opposition likes to use terms like euthanasia, physician-assisted suicide, mercy killing. And the reason they do that is because they know that those terms invoke fear. In fact, their campaign is based on fear. The reality is that a person that is suicidal is a person who wants to die. My wife, Brittany, wanted to live. So immediately we're talking about something completely different. A suicidal person is an individual who is making irrational decisions, who is depressed, who is despondent. Brittany was none of those things. In fact, she was making extremely rational decisions because months before she was in that final stage of her life, she had secured this medication just to make sure that she could have that gentle passing. The hope is that you don't need to use the medication, of course. The hope is that hospice and palliative care can keep a person comfortable so that their final days on this green earth are spent peacefully, not struggling. The reality is that in the case of my wife Brittany, with what that brain tumor was doing to her, she was not living those last few weeks of her life. She was suffering through those days and weeks. The only other option available, just by way of contrasting this, is the practice known as terminal sedation or palliative sedation. It's legal in all 50 states. I've seen that firsthand. A friend that I met while we were introducing this legislation in California, her name is Jennifer Glass, and she was suffering from lung cancer that had spread to her spine, her pelvis, and her brain. She died on August 11th, 2015, before the law in California went into effect. The practice of terminal sedation is the practice of putting a person into a coma and then withholding food and water until that individual dies of dehydration, starvation, and whatever the tumor, in her case, is doing to that individual. Her dying process took 5 days. It's not uncommon because it is a bit more of an art than a science. You know how many kilograms this patient weighs, and so there's a schedule where you're administering these meds to keep that person sedated. In her case, on 2 occasions, she started coming out of that sedation. Uncomfortable, clearly in pain, very traumatic for her. Her eyes are wide open, arms are flailing. Her husband, Harlan, rushing to administer more meds to put her back into that sedation. That promise of a gentle passing with the use of terminal sedation or palliative sedation was certainly a promise not fulfilled. When I saw that, I went to visit Jennifer that morning. She died later that evening. But when I saw what Jennifer had endured, it dawned on me, and it changed the way that I spoke then to the senators and assembly members in California, that the day that Jennifer Glass decided, with the advisement of her medical team, that that was the only option for her, the day that she decided to and agreed to terminal sedation, she knew that her life would end. That's the whole point of it. It's the exact same thing as the day that my wife Brittany decided she needed to utilize, because of the suffering that she was experiencing, a seizure that she had had that morning, that she needed to utilize medical aid in dying. The end result is death. The manner of getting there is significantly different. Jennifer suffered for those 5 days, and her family had to go through that entire experience. Brittany, within 5 minutes of taking the secobarbital, she fell asleep very peacefully, and within 30 minutes her breathing slowed to the point where she passed away. That is the gentle passing afforded by this option. That is not the way her dying process would have gone if she would have allowed that brain tumor to continue to torture her to death. The strength of this legislation, I'll wrap up, is that it is an option. A person has to apply for this on their own. If there are those who, because of their own belief system, their own faith, decide that, well, maybe that's not for me, well, then that person would simply never apply for it. It would not affect them at all. polling nationwide, 70% of the population of this country agrees that a terminally ill individual should have the option of medical aid in dying once they qualify according to this program. With that, we were successful last year in California. It became the 5th state, so it's Oregon, Washington, Vermont, Montana, and now California. The next state where I believe we will see this move forward and pass will be in Colorado. It's there as a ballot initiative. I'm here now in DC to speak with the DC Council members. I testified earlier. I was here earlier this year and spoke with some of them. It was a busy time, so on Thursday I'll be speaking, I'll be addressing different portions of the committees and then hopefully every member. But I'm an outsider. They appreciate hearing Brittany's story, but what really makes a difference is, of course, hearing from their own constituency. So with that, I would say that if you have the opportunity to please contact your DC Council member and lend your support to this. This is something that this legislation at the end of the day, this legislation, it does not result in more people dying. It simply results in fewer people suffering. And that's the appropriate way to look at this bill. That's what this legislation affords. So with that, I thank you. I appreciate you allowing me to address all of you. And if there's any questions, for sure. At this point, I've heard quite a bit in the last couple of years. So if there's really anything on your mind, from a religious perspective, from a medical perspective, I can share quite a bit. So thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Diaz. It's a very moving personal story. We really appreciate your taking the time to come and share it with us. I have read the act that's before the council, and I encourage my colleagues to do the same. Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Diaz? Concerns?
Malachi, sorry, as Malachi, and sorry for using your first name, but we're at that point in the evening. I mentioned, I also just want to thank you for your courage and your dedication to the issue and helping all of us with this issue. It's life and death and birth are the big issues. So in a weird way, I congratulate you on tackling that because it's critical for all of us. And I mentioned at the outset the DC Council's Health and Welfare Committee is picking this up on October 5th. And you mentioned that we should consider reaching out to our council members. What would you advise, or your colleagues with the Compassion and Choices group advise in terms of participating in the council deliberations, testifying, or otherwise getting involved? And this is an opportunity for a plug for the Compassion and Choices group as well, if you'd like. Sure.
So we do have a lobby day scheduled for this Thursday. And that's an opportunity, again, where, and hold on, I have some details on what's going to occur during the lobby day. But it will include, there is a health committee meeting, there is a breakfast, there will be materials out there as far as, to writing letters, approaching, sharing personal stories, which in California, that's what really makes a difference. When an elected representative hears from one of their constituents and a person shares with them a story like Brittany's, but in addition to Brittany's and Jennifer Glass and Emily Rose Olvera and Leslie Hollis, of course at this point I have people who come to me and share with me stories of their loved ones, of what either a good, gentle passing or one that didn't go so well. And so that does really make an impact. There will also be then, there is a press conference. So I'm doing everything I can from a media perspective as well to keep this top of mind. And again, that's the promise that I made to Brittany, that I would continue, now that we were successful in California, to work on other states. I mentioned that Colorado will probably be the next. Beyond that, hopefully here in DC, we have some good efforts moving forward in New York, although that's going to take probably 3-4 years down the road, Minnesota and Maryland, correct, is where we probably will be seeing some activity. And what I find that kind of time and again is that with 70% of the population agreeing that this should be available to a terminally ill individual, it's really just about the legislators catching up to the will of their constituents. The support is there from the general public, and what helps the legislators get there to the question is involvement, is hearing these personal stories and words of support.
So I just want to interject. Good evening. My name is Donna Smith. I am the legislative field manager for DC. We would love to invite you, if you are so inclined, to come to our lobby day. We have a program in the morning where we will be addressing supporters and giving out information. We have this press conference with Mary Kay, Dan, and others, because we have some stories from DC as well that we want to get out there. And then that afternoon, we will be visiting legislators. They need to hear your voice. Chuck Ludlow is one of my best volunteers, and so if you have any other questions, you can certainly address Chuck. But we invite you out there. It's from 9 to 3. It is at the Wilson Building, room 103. Feel free to go contact us at Compassionate Choices, or talk to Chuck, or reach out to your council members. If you cannot come that day, October 5th is the markup. They need to hear from you. Thank you.
Nicole,
Question?
hang on.
Sorry.
Is there anything that you want to say? I don't want to. Just 1 minute. I don't want to put you on the spot. Behind you, Nicole.
Hi, for anybody who doesn't know, I'm Nicole Renitz. I'm Councilmember Chay's legislative director. And I just want to follow up to what Dan said, which is, yes, the DC council members need to hear your voice. The markup is scheduled for October 5th. Currently, I, crossing my fingers, believe we have a narrow majority in the markup. It's very narrow. The members of that committee are Councilmembers Yvette Alexander, Councilmembers LaRuby May, Councilmember David Grasso, Councilmember Che, and Councilmember Nadeau. Yeah, so our majority, like I said, is narrow. Those are the first 5 council members we have to focus on. Councilmember Che is already supportive of this bill, as you might know, she introduced it. But, you know, assuming we can get it out of committee on October 5th, we'll be facing the full council shortly thereafter, probably October 11th or in November. But either way, the council members definitely need to hear your voice. The rest of the council, October 5th is just the first hurdle. So I encourage you to reach out to the rest of the DC council members, especially the at-large council members who represent all of us. And I just want to say, I think this bill has a very good chance of passing here, but we do need to hear from our committee.
Thank you. Okay, please go ahead.
Well, my concern, I think it's a great bill. I would support it. My concern is, do we get squelched again like we did with our gun control law by Congress?
And so that concern, which I had the parameters of that sent to me, and I was reading through that certainly is a unique scenario that we have here in D.C. The likelihood that this would be an issue that they decide to squelch or kind of squash this, that yes, both the House and the Senate, they would need to pass something to try to block it, and then it goes to the president, and they have 30 days to do that. From what I've heard, it would be more likely that they would simply try to maybe not take that action, but just try to withhold any sort of funding for it, so in a sense, to restrict it in that fashion. From a funding perspective, there is not a whole lot that goes into this. There is reporting that happens in the states of Oregon, California, Vermont, and Washington. So every year you see a number of individuals that apply for and qualify were granted the prescription, and a number of individuals that actually used it. By the way, fully more than a third of the individuals never end up using it. It just kind of speaks to the fact that this is an option, and for most people, if they don't need to utilize it, they don't. But back to this issue, I guess that is a possibility. I would defer to, and probably that question asked on Thursday of Councilmember Che would garner a certainly more informed answer than the one that I'm providing right now. But yeah, I guess I'd be hopeful that if Congress does not go through that process, that the very worst they could do would be to attempt to withhold funding for it. But again, there is not a whole lot of cost associated with it. So if that could be gotten around, I'm not sure.
But as we all know, that's always a risk here
It
in
is a risk,
DC.
but once the bill passes, so what happens is an appropriations rider, an annual appropriations bill. So if in any year in the future they either forget to include it or there's not enough support to include that annual rider, then the law would go into effect.
I just wanted to, again, thank you, Dan, and thank you, Nicole, for your attendance tonight, along with Mr. Ludlam and his wife and the folks from Compassion and Choices. I just want to be clear, speaking as an individual commissioner, that this is where local government and local institutions work. This is an opportunity for people in our community to speak up for matters that matter to them. And I fully intend to put a resolution in front of this ANC and probably work with some of the commissioners and get in front of other ANCs. I think we do serve a critical role in this. There's some discussion about whether we pass some kind of resolution tonight or pass some sort of endorsement tonight. I haven't had that opportunity to poll the other commissioners, and I'm not going to put them in that situation, but I do know that every one of us takes this matter very seriously and will look at it. And to the degree we as individuals want to participate in October, we will. Our ANC meets again in, I don't know, October 20-something. So we will, I will at least propose that we pass a resolution at that point. 18. I don't know how that aligns with the actions of the council. Humbly, I'm not sure that a resolution per se is going to weigh in that much, but I, to the degree that we hear that some things like that would, I'm happy to try to have a special session or consider some other options.
I definitely think ANC resolutions are helpful.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Dan, thank you.
Okay, now we're going to move to our last presentation on the agenda, a presentation on the Beach Drive Rehabilitation Project. We have John Thomas here. You're now representing NPS? Right? Or DDOT?
DDOT.
Okay. So if you would just talk us through, just briefly, what's going to happen so everybody's aware and how it's going to impact our neighborhood.
Sure. So starting on the 22nd, should make sure.
Thursday.
Thursday.
Yeah, so midnight Wednesday, Beach Drive will be closed from Rock Creek to Tilden. Construction will commence at that point for segment 1A, and it'll last. NPS is saying this is an NPS project, by the way. Just make sure you understand that they're doing the work. DDOT's role is to help mitigate the traffic impacts. That segment 1A, 1B will take 6 to 9 months. There are 4 phases, so it's going to take 3 years to complete all 4 phases, 6 to 9 months for each phase. Is what NPS is saying. And they'll be closing that section. During that closure, there'll be a series of detours to get through. So roughly 70% of the traffic coming north is coming on the 16th Street side. The other 30% is coming down from our Connecticut Ave side. While we've been able to do some traffic counts. We've done a series of signal timing adjustments all along the Connecticut Ave corridor and other corridors and other side streets to try to make sure that during the rush hours we keep traffic moving. That will also then means that we've extended the time for pedestrian crosswalks as well, so taking into account all modes, not just cars, taking into account all modes. And of course, we're going to be working like regularly on this with MPS and tracking the traffic and making sure whatever adjustments need to make as this project goes on. That's not, I would say it's a marathon, but certainly not going to be like a one-day fix. And so anytime there's an accident, anytime something happens in the system in and around this space, we're going to see impacts, right? It's going to work really well until an incident or accident happens, then we're going to start to see kind of bigger backups happen probably more often. But I think we're just here to let you know that we're working closely with them and coordinating the best we can, and a lot of it will be behavior driven and what residents choose or commuters choose to do. Much like the surge with safe track programs, right? Each time one happens, everyone kind of has to figure out a new way to do it. So we're the eastbound crossings will be active during this point, so you can still get across. It's just that if you're coming down Beach, you're going to have to turn at Tilden. You can go over to Connecticut, come back down, and then Cathedral, and then get back onto Rock Creek. And then first going back out, it's up Cathedral, Connecticut, Tilden, Beach for this first phase.
Thank you.
And we passed out a little one-sheeter. The best thing probably to do is go to the MPS website and sign up for the traffic alert, or the construction project alert, and then alert you as that construction activity is. Get alerts to that. Thursday night we're doing another meeting in the Cleveland Park area at the Cleveland Park Public Library, 7:30. If you want to come down there as well, you're welcome to come down. Because that's the first group that they're really getting hit harder, or the impact is felt more there.
Well,
I mean, we have Tilden right in the middle of our
Yep.
ANC.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, we want to talk about that.
Right. So, as
And MPS will be at Thursday night's meeting as well, so they'll have their full PIO and construction representatives there. So if you have really like specific project questions, they'll be there to answer as well.
Is it at the library?
It's at the library.
At, you know, the time?
7:30, right? Ian, I think is what the last I saw was 7:30. We can I'll send something to you guys tomorrow. Just to make
Okay.
sure you have it.
At which library, sorry?
Cleveland Park Public Library.
So, thanks, John. Clearly, as Commissioner Jakopczyk just said, we have Tilden in our ANC.
Right.
The concern, I think, is less about the actual project and more about what's going to happen with all that traffic as it flows, not just up Tilden and onto Connecticut, but then where it's going to go. Is it going to go beyond Connecticut to Reno and then try to cut through the neighborhood to get to Wisconsin? So there are going to be issues
Right.
like that. And then as the project moves further north, as you get up towards Forest Hills, there are going to be people cutting through the neighborhoods. So our big concern, my big concern is how do we mitigate those sorts of cut-through commuters?
Like I said, we've adjusted the signals, so the timing of the signals. So when you start to make those actions on the detours, the signalization will work you all the way through that detour. So we'll try to get you. The goal is to get you through most of those movements and down, so you don't see the backup. Again, we think we have enough space in the system to adjust with these timings to try to find a balance, but we'll know more once it starts to happen, and we'll make adjustments once we start seeing more activity.
Could you be a little bit more specific about exactly what's going on at Tilden, Connecticut?
So you're going to come down Beach, and you're going to turn right on Tilden, and come out of Tilden and go left on Connecticut. And those rights and lefts will have an extended cycle.
Okay.
So it'll allow for that left and right activity to happen at a longer duration. Also deal with crossing for PEDs as well, so they'll have the cycle. And that same timing will continue down Connecticut, so that movement can keep going until it gets down to Cathedral. So it's based on what we know for counts. We'll see when the activity starts to happen. There's going to be diversion going over on 16th Street too, so it's not all going to come that way. And then also Montgomery County's been involved in all of this, so they're working to divert further upstream, right? So take 495 over and come in that way or make decisions on East-West Highway. So there are a lot of options for them to make choices up above. So but once people get into kind of the Beach Drive chute, then really you're kind of stuck with coming out of Tilden and working your way through. So, I think human behavior will adapt to it a little bit, right? And we'll make adjustments, but we'll know Thursday probably gonna be the worst just because day one, but, we're on it and working. We just want to let her know that we're working with everybody here and the project and doing everything we can do with our system to allow for this movement to happen.
And when we see specific problems, how do we
Is there a
convey those to you?
hotline?
Yes, we have a beach.drive@dc.gov. You email that. You just email your concern or whatever you're seeing going. Beach.drive@dc.gov, and then we'll take a look at it. We're gonna be continuously watching traffic and counts and watching all the movements so that we can make adjustments. But certainly anything you're seeing out in the system in your area, we'll get someone out there right away and try to make adjustments.
What about construction projects that are
Yeah.
we
So we
have
will,
a real hassle with that.
Yep, so there'll be, we will certainly be paying attention to requests for occupation of public space and other things that are going to affect, certainly in this corridor, right, along these detour
Right.
routes. So Matthew Marcoux in our public space office is already on it, and we're working with the hotels to understand what they're doing in the next 6 to 9 months for any big events that might be going on.
Yep, conventions,
Yeah.
etc.
So we're really just trying to, as soon as we can get information, try to make the best plan we can. Again, I would say we restrict public space permits, but we're certainly going to try to do our best.
Well,
to
what about
mitigate
your
those
own
impacts.
construction, like on sidewalks and street repaving? Love
Yeah,
that Brandywine's repaved, but
Yeah, I don't think we have
that's
too many
across.
things that are like that would be ours are faster sidewalk work. We can get off the street if we're in this area.
Okay.
We can utilize-
Wisconsin Avenue has pretty significant
I mean,
Pepco-like work happening.
Yeah,
now.
they're
that
getting
was
close to.
pretty bad.
Yeah, they're getting close to finishing, and then they have restrictions starting after rush hours and stopping before the next rush hour. Again, these are the things we'll all keep a tab on, so that we can make adjustments or have developers or whoever's in that space make those adjustments so they're not impacting.
Could I make a request that after this 3-year period, that Connecticut Avenue gets repaved? Especially some very bad areas through our area.
I will
Take that under advisement.
We gotta do a resolution for that, huh?
I think one thing to look at this project is it's not just a road construction project. 6 bridges are going to be rehabbed during the project, and all the stormwater mitigation process will take care of. So we will allow that water you see going to Rock Creek is going to, I wouldn't say all of it, but a big portion of it's going to be put into the system so we can manage it through DC water and through the proper way instead of having it wash through the Rock Creek Park. So it's kind of a really big project, right? It's 10 years, I think, and yes, it's 10 years in the making for them of planning and getting through the engineering of it. So,
So
in 1991.
Let me recognize Commissioner Ray.
So that was, I think, part of the answer to my question, which is why is it taking so long? And I'm just going to tell you my 3 questions,
Yeah.
and you can answer
ahead.
in narrative or whatever. So why is it taking so long? Secondly, you talked about stormwater mitigation. That's great. I'm sorry,
Yeah,
David
I told
Bardeen
him.
isn't
Yeah.
here. He will love
Yeah.
to hear that. But can you also talk about like bike paths and jogging trails, and is that part of the process too?
Yep.
And then the third part of the question is, what are the next 2? I think there are 2 more phases after this. And
3.
Can
2.5.
3 more phases. Can you tell us the timing on those? Specifically, when is the kind of Brandywine Davenport stretch going to be effective?
I haven't committed to memory the out ones yet, but it's basically moving north.
Yeah.
In
Yes,
that
I
same
know.
kind of chunk.
We're next.
Yeah, so basically you're next. The end is like the DC line and Maryland area. area, Joyce Road.
We are this one,
This
too.
one.
We are this one.
Yeah, cars, yeah.
Six, this is MPS's schedule, right? So they're saying 6 to 9 months per phase.
Okay.
Yeah.
So 3-year roughly.
Where did you get that?
from
Why
their
things
website.
along, this is part of their project design. I don't want to be on record. I don't know the whole thought process behind it, but I think they looked at all the different options, and this was like, do you close the road permanently for some period of time, or do you close it in phases and allow for the activity? And the trails they want to keep open throughout the project as best they can. Obviously, there'll be some impacts, I think, just based on construction, but all of that is part of this program, is to improve the road, the stormwater, the bridges. So in the end, it'll be a great place for bikes. If anyone's ever ridden a bike on Beach Drive, it's almost impossible at this point.
Yep.
So it would be, it'll be a smooth pavement, but also the stormwater piece is really, really important.
So during the first phase, and I know you're continuing to answer Mary Beth's questions, but the pedestrian bike path, I understand, will remain open, and yet will that eventually be improved? Is that part of the project, and how will it be open if it's being improved?
There are some improvements, and those will be the times when closures will occur, but the goal is to keep bike and head moving as an option as well.
Yeah, what they'll do is they'll move.
When the bike trail will be closed, but will that be posted?
Yes. Yeah.
Some of us use that for commuting instead of the road.
Yeah, that'll be, when they have to do something like that, they'll be posting. Like I said, the best thing is to sign up for those alerts, because then that's their mechanism of alerting people, changes, or,
And to sign up for the alerts, we go to each.
Yeah, I noticed that someone handed it to me as I was walking out. They didn't make the second back copy, so I'm going to send you the full.
If you get us an electronic copy,
Yeah.
we'll put it on the
It's
website.
Okay,
it's
so-
like
hang on.
NPS.ec,
Yeah.
NPS.gov, and it's their construction, and it'll alert. So like if you have, I'm just guessing, but like weather delays or things may happen where their construction's delayed a bit, they can send out an alert saying,
Right.
what we were going to do by tomorrow is now going to be taking another 2 days due to.
But at least
So, excuse me.
initially, the bike trail will remain open. Thank you.
Yeah. Let's finish with the commissioners, and then we'll ask for questions from the audience.
So, in anticipation of the Brandywine Davenport piece to the Maryland line, can we, talk with you all about how cars are going to be rerouted so that it's, kind of the best, safest plan for the neighborhood?
We need a next plan.
Yeah, so
Because
it's,
we already have, as you know, problems on Brandywine. I hate to say in here, but I live on Davenport, so I can tell you,
Yeah.
we already
Yeah,
have
we'll,
backup 2 blocks in the morning. And it's narrow, where at least Tilden is a little
Yeah.
wider, and it's split.
And Brandywine and Albemarle too.
And yeah, so we're very nervous about how this is going to impact. Plus, some of the roads aren't in great shape, even though you've done Brandywine, Davenport's not in great shape. So
Yeah, we will.
at parts of Albemarle aren't.
I'll go back and we'll get with Sam and our.
Oh, is Sam doing it?
Sam. Well,
Okay.
yeah, we're all
Okay,
doing it,
sure.
But, and we'll get. I'll report back and we'll.
Okay.
Time to come and
Well, if you're going to come back, we would like you to come back
yeah, it'll
and
be,
get with us before.
Yeah, it'll
if-
be a little time.
Okay.
Once we get rolling through this first one going.
Okay.
And then we can shift gears to get into the next one.
Okay, we'd be happy
Yeah.
to come down to your office and,
We've got maps, so
sit down with maps, and
Yeah.
that would be great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, we want the intel from the neighborhood, right? Because we can
Yeah.
make a lot of decisions based on what we know and traffic counts, but obviously there are certain things like school drop-offs
Yep.
and other little things that go on.
Well, you
that
don't
we may
think
not
about
know.
it, right? You don't know where
That's
they're
part of
coming
it.
from and where they're going to, yeah.
And that's part of tomorrow's meeting is to try to get some more intel of
Okay.
the park area, just to make sure we understand where these little spots
We're
are.
already getting calls
Yeah.
about it.
Well, yeah, it's I think you have to remember it's not just road work. It's it's the stormwater, the bridges,
Right.
the roads.
Yeah.
Is a big
Yes.
thing. It's not just paving the road.
So, Commissioner Dickinson.
Yeah, I just have one question. I don't know if it's what the MPO is, a metropolitan planning organization, or if it's MCOG or whatever that you're coordinating with. But can you describe from a congestion mitigation view or from an alternative transportation view, how you're going to get these cars off the road? I mean, it's great that you're, doing electronic signalization adjustments. Doesn't sound like there are going to be any fewer cars as a result of that. They're just going to be more cars coming through fewer areas. So I'm wondering whether DDOT, working with your other partners, have looked at any reduction measures, any ideas about how to incentivize employers, in terms of metro checks, in terms of telecommuting, flexi-place work schedules, things of that nature. What is DDOT or the other governmental agencies doing to get us out of this car mentality at this point?
Well, I think every group is doing everything they can to encourage multimodal behavior, right? And so.
But in this context, what's happening?
We would look at it the same way we've looked at some of the surges, where we're encouraging people to look at carpool and bus or bike, or a combination of bike to another metro stop that gets you in a different way. GoDCGo.com is our website that lists all the different modes that you can take to travel, and you can set your own. You can pick a route and put your begin and end date, and find different ways to get there. We're going to have BMS signs throughout that are alerting. Montgomery County is going to have signs up there, so they'll be alerting people as they come through, where there are points that, like, this is a decision point if you're in a car, right? I don't know if there'll be more cars per se, just the same cars without one road to use, right? So, certainly we're going to encourage everyone to know what they're doing and make the best choice, but I think people are going to try what they're going to try and then learn from that experience and then make an adjustment is what typically, the guy who bikes or the lady that bikes is probably going to still bike. It's trying to get the person who drives all the time to a couple days a week make a separate decision or do something different, right?
Since we have Nicole here, I'll raise one other question. I think Councilmember Che, a couple years ago or recently, introduced some pretty innovative legislation on biking and the ability of bikers to proceed through red lights. The idea being that a lot of bikers have as equal right to the road, if not more right, to not pollute on the road, and that by stopping at red lights, especially now with more and more bikers, that they're actually adding to congestion. They're actually frustrating the drivers. And if their ability to, by the way, if you go to the Guardian article, you will see many cities around the world that are a little bit more progressive than the district and have dealt with biking longer than the district, have considered whether, once it's safe to proceed after stopping at a red light, to proceed through the red light. So let me just put a plug in for people to consider that again. There are plenty of people that are frustrated by a lot of cyclists that don't obey the traffic laws, but we're a little bit more nuanced than that as a society now. And there's a great heightened awareness of bikers and being subjected to additional congestion now and the air quality associated with that. Congratulations for those people that are commuting and continuing to pollute. It's incredible. And so I do encourage people to consider alternative forms of transportation, and I do encourage people to think about how to accommodate biking in this city. There's going to be more and more push for that. I know people say, oh, bikers running red lights. There's a nuance to that. It turns out that government is nuance. And if we can look at biking measures such as the ability to proceed through red lights so that we're getting out of the way of cars, you can sit at any intersection and watch as all these cars back up behind city bikes and start honking their horns and telling the bikes to get on the sidewalk. And then you'll hear all the people on the sidewalk saying, what are you doing on the sidewalk? So I'm just going to put in a plug for the Councilmember Che's bill on, quote, running red lights. It's not running red lights. It's taken a little bit more of a nuanced position on that, and I think we need to revisit biking in general, and this would be a great opportunity to think about it. That's my pitch. Thank you.
Let me
Yeah.
give the floor to Commissioner Jakopczyk.
So I just have a few questions
Sure.
about the actual plan. So you confirm that the east-west crossings will still remain open, right? So where Tilden comes into Beach Drive, that's not.
Where it goes
I
to
mean,
Park.
You're gonna
where
go
goes
forward.
into Park. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
you're gonna go
So
Porter.
Park can go
Yeah,
across.
so you're gonna go, you're gonna come down to across to Piney Branch.
Yep.
So the crossing, there's a gap there between 1A and segment 1A and 1B that will remain open to allow that east-west.
I'm talking more where you go down to Tilden, it becomes Park.
Park.
It'll be where it initially closes on the northernmost part of this segment.
Yeah,
That-
up
that'll
here,
remain
is
open.
that gonna remain open here?
You're gonna be able to get back on,
It's not even people who need to get back on. It's people who are taking Tilden to get over.
They
to
go
16.
across the 16, yeah.
And that shouldn't be affected, correct?
yeah, so the gap, there's a gap on this, did you see it right in the center?
Yeah.
That's gonna remain open during the day.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
That's not
not
what
what
he's
I'm
talking
talking
about.
about.
Yeah,
I'm talking about the northernmost part of your graphic right here at the beginning of the detour. Where you
yeah,
have
Tilden
the,
coming across. Yeah.
so Tilden at
Turns
that
into
point.
Park.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
the closure is south of them.
Okay,
Yeah.
so that's not going to be affected.
Right. You
Okay,
just can't cross.
You can't
the
turn
intersection
right
of Tilden
Yeah.
and keep going, but you can
Correct.
make all the.
you can't turn right from Tilden.
From Tilden
You can't turn
on,
left
right.
from Park.
but you
can't
can
go straight
continue
from
going
Beach.
straight.
Right.
And
Think
the,
of it as a dead end or a T intersection now going south.
okay, and all the other crossings, the traffic coming south on Beach, they will be able to turn left onto Park, right? They won't be forced up right onto Tilden.
Yeah, I need to
Come a
double
T
check to make sure. I believe, yeah, the assumption is people are going to be coming down Beach and staying, and they're not going to want to cross back over to 16th, so they're going to go up to Connecticut and back down to stay on that side of downtown.
Okay.
You know.
And so my next question is just a little bit further up Tilden, and I know this might involve a little bit more DPD stuff, but for the initial part of this, has there any thought about putting traffic control officers at the Tilden and Connecticut intersection?
Or any of these
Yeah.
major,
We have plans for, managing or traffic mitigation
Mhm.
at points where we have crosswalks or issues that, I can't say which ones yet. We're
Okay.
still working with MPS, but there'll be TCOs deployed to this area. We'll also have some, our road team, which is our roadway operations group, they'll have a path that's going to be kind of moving through this during the rush hour. So if there's any vehicles that gets disabled, we can get them off the road quickly and keep traffic flowing.
Okay. And then also, has there been any thought to like additional signage? I know right before that intersection at Connecticut and Tilden, one of the buildings there has an alleyway that a lot of them use, and it dumps right out onto Tilden.
Like it's just there, it's at the end before you get to Connecticut on the right.
Yeah, yeah. And I know that they're planning on, I mean, they need it, they drop off their groceries, they drop off their packages, and then they go look for street parking because the building doesn't have enough.
Right.
But if that's blocked by, this increase in traffic, I don't know if signage would make sense there. I know we're going to have a little bit of a feeling out process,
Yeah,
right? And
we'll
figuring out where
these
things
are the
go.
things that we'll take
Mhm.
back as a local point that
Okay.
we need to be cognizant of. So when I go back tomorrow, we're going back onto the map and drawing the things that we do. And so this will be one of the points we'll
All right,
put on.
that'll be great. I'll flag that, and then in terms of beach.drive
Yeah.
at dc.gov for further stuff.
Yeah, just send, and then we'll some things may be an issue because we had an accident somewhere, but if there's
but
certainly
things like
send
this.
us, but if there's ongoing things that you, like every day that can't necessarily be an accident that's causing a problem, maybe, so, hey, can you check this out? And we'll go. But we're also gonna be out there proactively looking too.
Okay.
Certainly having guidance.
And my final question is about that proactivity. At this time, I haven't heard anything about parking on Tilden being affected or changed. Is there anything under consideration in terms of changing the hours those spots are open?
the other.
Not until that I know of.
Okay.
There possibly be some parking spaces down in Cleveland Park, but we're not sure. But
Okay.
it's related to the DC Public Library project down there.
Okay.
It's not on Connecticut, it's off in the neighborhood.
That's just one of the other things I want to flag for
It's
you.
going to be basically the same.
If there is talk of any parking on Tilden being affected,
Yeah, no, I don't.
if you give us as much heads up
Yeah,
as
yeah.
possible for that,
Yeah.
and it'll help with the neighborhood.
Okay, I'm going to ask if there are any other questions. Do you have any follow-up questions that you would like to ask?
Yeah, specifically, you talked about changing signals to help the traffic keep flowing across Tilden and down Connecticut. We've got 1,000 cars that cut through Forest Hills each morning, most of them coming from Grant Road, and then they funnel out onto Davenport, Brandywine, Albemarle. Will you change signals to facilitate that, or will you let the cars back up to discourage them from cutting through Forest Hills?
I don't know. The only
Yeah.
signal timing I know of, and I certainly look into it, but is really that Tilden to Connecticut.
Sure, well, that makes sense, because that's where you want them to go.
Right.
To facilitate coming across. But I'd discourage them from having more than 1,000 or so that are currently cutting through Forest Hills to facilitate their doing so.
I will take it back to our traffic team and make sure they understand that area.
Just a short one?
Yes,
Oh,
I have
and a
one.
short
I know probably nobody's thought of it. Well, you probably have thought about it. Is a snow route going to? I mean, Connecticut becomes a parking lot.
No, those are the things that
I know. I'm sorry
ready
to ask
for,
that question, but
yeah, we'll just have to deal with it. Hopefully that we have one of those light years.
okay.
No,
I haven't
okay.
really thought
Right?
how to.
I mean,
No, kind of elevating Tilden's plowing.
yeah.
Well,
no, I mean,
that's what I'm
yeah,
trying
yeah,
to
we would
understand. Are you
certainly
gonna
have a focus if
focus
we did
on
it
these
all.
areas?
Yeah, we would.
Okay.
We would certainly make
Yeah.
sure that the detours
Yeah.
and the changes would be clear.
Okay. If there are no other questions from the audience, I'm going to say thank you for coming out and for answering our questions, and we are going to stay in close contact
we'll
with
reach
you.
back out to you.
Let me also just say that to get information, I have something from NPS here. It says if you text the word Beach Drive to 888-777, then you'll get text information back about the project.
All one word. Beach Drive.
Beach Drive. And what they say in this 888-777, and what they say in this information is that the bike path will remain open the whole time, and at portions that they have to close for reconstruction will be moved onto the street then. So
You do this texting while you're driving, right?
that's right.
We'll see you
There'll be
in
no red lights
November
go on.
or December,
Yeah,
whenever you're
feel
coming
free to
back.
come down to the Cleveland Park meeting if you want on Thursday, because yes, will be there and get some like, project related questions.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Okay. So now we're going to move to our final agenda item, which is other business. Does anybody have any other business to raise?
I thought you were going to do the motion.
I will,
Oh, okay,
yeah.
okay.
Can I ask
Thank
one
you.
quick question? Was it 3 8s and 3 7s?
3 8s and 3 7s.
Yes.
Okay, so I have one piece of other business. We've had conversations, both among ourselves as commissioners and in the grant committee, about our rolling grant application process. Currently, we accept grants whenever they come in throughout the year, and then we consider them at one meeting and approve them or reject them at the following meeting. The concern is it makes it hard. Doing it this way makes it hard to evaluate grants against one another and to think about them comprehensively from a budgetary standpoint as well. So I'm going to make a motion to cease our rolling grant application process and change it. I'll just read it. Motion to cease accepting grant applications on a rolling basis and instead accept applications only twice per year. Once at the March meeting for consideration in April, and again at the September meeting for consideration in October. So that's 6 months apart. And again, that will allow us to consolidate all of our grants twice a year and consider them from a budgetary standpoint that way. So first, is there a second? Is there any discussion, concerns?
I just have a quick thing that you and I have talked about, but I just want it to be clear and on the record, and that is that when there's a possible special project like Venice Main Street requesting funds, that would not be considered as part of this grant proposal. A special
Right.
project
Right.
request
Just
would be considered outside of
outside of the
this
grant process.
parameter.
Correct. This would just
I
be
mean,
for
I
the
just want
grants.
everybody to be clear
This is
on
the-
that,
the-
because we are planning to bring a proposal this fall.
Right.
In that light, I'm wondering, I support the idea of Venice, Main Street and others having those special project or special grant needs. I'm wondering if we're potentially going to face, and I guess we can always amend this resolution, but that there might be other emergency circumstances or other elevated needs that we identify that we'd like to just give attention to more quickly. So, and is there room to build that in here, or do you think, we can always come back and amend this as needed and amend our rules on it?
I would think we don't need to amend the rules. I think it kind of, the special projects, I don't think it's just unique to Van Ness Main Street. Sort of, it walks like a duck, it talks like a duck. It's a special project, but grants from,
The basic grants.
Yeah.
I mean, we get some
The
the same
Hearst
kind of thing.
Elementary music
and-
grant is not a special project per se, but
Right,
things that
but
are.
I mean,
yeah.
the schools will know that they can come at these two
Right.
times,
Right.
and
Right.
the Tiger Race, the
Right.
ones that come back to us all the time,
Right.
they should,
Okay.
there'll be a time for them to put their grant in.
No, but
Yeah.
that is an important point,
Yeah.
because there will have to be a period of getting used to this.
Right.
There will be some people who want to apply for a grant for something that's happening in 2 months, and they've just missed the
Right.
deadline, and
should
Yeah,
we
that's gonna be
phase
a
this
problem.
in? I mean, in case, I'm looking at this right now, if someone has an event in January or February of next year that they were looking for help with, they're not going to have a chance to. So is there a way we could make this effective, January 1st? And, if there's any projects before then, ask any for submissions, still take them in on the current rolling basis for the next 3 months.
That's a good idea.
I think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
I mean, we've really struggled to get people to
To
apply
do
for
it.
grants,
Mm-hmm.
and so this is going to make it harder. So I think that's a good idea to phase it in.
But there's got to be a learning curve, because other nonprofit and other organizations do it this way, and it takes the burden off of the people on the committee to have to do it all the time.
And it's also for our budgeting.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
and
really
it
for
really helps
budgeting.
with the budgeting too.
So, that's the main point. So we don't get, a $3,000 grant application every month, and then, at the end of the year, we suddenly realize we've spent a lot more than we expected.
Correct.
Okay, so how about if I amend this to say, and again, at the September meeting for consideration in October, to take effect January 1st, 2017.
March 2017, no?
Well, we'll continue accepting grants on a rolling basis until the end of this year. And then starting January 1st, we'll accept them March and September.
Correct.
And we'll,
Okay, I thought we were talking about just as is until March.
Oh, as is until March, or as is until
No.
January?
As is till January is what you just
I think we
brought
can,
up.
I think we can start this
I
in
don't,
January.
I wouldn't do it till March.
and we just need to make it really prominent on
And
the website.
And perhaps send a note to anyone who's gotten a grant in the past
That's a
3
good
years,
idea.
letting them
I
know.
don't think we've gotten much in the fall.
No.
They usually come in the spring. Or right now,
Yeah.
like September seems
Okay.
to be the, do you want to put something in here about this does not include special projects?
No, 'cause special projects aren't grants.
Okay, but, all right.
So like the thing we paid
The
Travis,
vision, the vision.
that wasn't a grant. So this will go into the grant application
Okay.
guidelines.
All right.
Okay. Any other discussion? So right now it reads, motion to cease accepting grant applications on a rolling basis as of January 1st, 2017, and instead accept applications only twice per year, once in March for consideration in April, again in September for consideration in October. And the September one is, I picked that to gear it towards the beginning of the school
Yeah,
year.
that's good. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
So no other discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
As amended. Passes 7-0. Great. Anything else? Any other business?
Motion to adjourn.
Second?
Yep.
All in favor?
Yay.
Adjourned. All
Oh my
right.
gosh, we're out before 10 o'clock.
10 o'clock.
Yay!
Hallelujah.
Good job on the
Good
consent
analogy.
agenda.